civilian casualties, making it very difficult to comply with the requirements under international law to minimise civilian casualties. Let me state quite clearly up front that we would support an early investigation into all incidents that may have resulted in civilian casualties, particularly the reported shelling of hospitals, so as to determine whether war crimes have been committed. The UN's estimate, if it is accurate, of over 6,500 civilian deaths since January is truly shocking and appalling.
It's quite clear that the Sri Lankan government is impervious to anything the rest of the world says. They've turned their back on the rest of the world. Isn't it about time the rest of the world turned their back on the Sri Lankan government, isolated them and held them to account for the appalling things that are going on?
As I will come on to say, democratic states are held to a higher standard of responsibility than other organisations, and I do think the Sri Lankan government, as we have been repeatedly urging, needs to respond on that issue. I am conscious of time. I will give way and then make some progress.
The Minister making absolutely clear that the British government supports investigation of any allegations of war crimes. Has the British government made it absolutely clear to the Sri Lankan government that that is our message and that's what we will pursue?
Emphatically, yes, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before I say anything further about the conflict, I also want to touch on the Tamil demonstrations that have been taking place outside this House and elsewhere. It can, frankly, come as no surprise that the Tamil community here has been galvanised by events in Sri Lanka to march through the streets of London and to stage protests on our doorstep in Parliament Square and outside a number of diplomatic missions. And I want to pay tribute to the vast majority of Tamils in this country who make valued contributions to British society and to assure them that we do fully recognise their legitimate concerns. The right to demonstrate is fundamental to the workings of our democratic society, but obviously that must remain within the confines of the law.
I'm pleased to hear the Minister say that, but would he be aware that the reputation of the government and the British state is actually harmed in the eyes of the Tamils by pointless attempts to use the terrorist legislation against individuals like Murali and Vithi Tharan, who are just found innocent of any wrongdoing in terms of consorting with Tamil Tigers? And can he please pass on to those people who make those strange judgments about who to arrest and attempt to prosecute, that it doesn't help to put innocent men in the dock and wreck their lives for a year, only to find that they were innocent, as anybody who knew them already knew?
The honourable gentleman will know that there is, and I've stated that, a right to peaceful protest. He will also know that there is operational independence in terms of the decisions that are taken in such circumstances, and I believe that is the right approach. Returning to the conflict, there are, in fact, I believe, two crises presently unfolding in Sri Lanka. The first and the most immediately pressing concern is the fate of the civilians still caught in the conflict area. The lack of independent observers makes it impossible to be certain of the facts, but the UN and the ICRC estimate that there are anything between 50 and 100,000 civilians still trapped in an area which, to put this in context, is slightly larger than the combined areas of St James's and Green Parks. There are very clear indications that the LTTE are holding many of these civilians against their will and using some of them as human shields. They shoot at civilians who try to escape, forcibly recruit those able to fight, including children, and use others as labour to construct earthwork defences. We do rightly, utterly condemn these practices, but we also have to be clear that this cannot in any way, shape or form excuse any failings by the Sri Lankan government. As I said earlier, democratically elected governments are rightly held to higher account by the international community. The UN itself has spoken of a bloodbath, and this has to be avoided.
And the Minister knows how supportive we are of him and his colleagues. Given there has not been able to be the international presence that everybody has wanted, would the government be willing to make representations to ask the Americans, who I understand have taken satellite photographs which show as much evidence as there is of activity, to make those formally public, available to the international community in order to seek to influence both sides, because they know what they are doing is being seen and there are records of it?
I say to the honourable gentleman, who I know has taken a long interest in this issue, that our view comprehensively is that there is still not enough information to make an accurate assessment. However, I've listened to the point he's made. I will look at that with my colleagues and see if that is a possible way forward. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have consistently maintained that both sides have to abide by their obligations under international humanitarian law and do everything possible to avoid putting civilians at unnecessary risk. As the Foreign Secretary made clear in New York on Monday, our message is simple. The killing has to stop. The government calls on the Sri Lankan government to stop their military campaign and to allow the United Nations or the ICRC to facilitate a move away from danger to safety by those civilians who wish to leave. And we call on the LTTE to let civilians, those same Tamils it claims to represent, to leave the conflict area. I'm very conscious of the time that is available, and there are many members who want to speak. I'll give way one more time and then make some progress.
Thank you very much, Minister. Deputy Speaker. Everybody appreciate and thankful to both the Foreign Secretary's intervention and the statement in USA, and also Special Envoy's visit to Sri Lanka, Des Brown's visit. But at the same time, after the statement made on Monday, there are still thousands of people killed in the last. The bombing is still going on. If we look at today's papers, you can see the photographs in the free papers spread in the underground. I'm sure that if you get those, you will see those photographs. So it means there's enough evidence, and the communities over here are not satisfied, and they are worried about their loved ones who are killed, or they are not aware what is happening to them. I think that the communities and the local Tamil communities particularly would like to have more and more intervention in that.
Say to my honourable friend, I emphatically understand the frustration of people who want to see this conflict brought to a conclusion. A reality is that despite our best efforts, the conflict is still going on. I say that to describe the scale of the challenge that we face, but in no way does that mean that we will stop in our unstinting efforts to try and bring the conflict to a conclusion. Madam Deputy Speaker, the civilians I've been referring to are in constant fear for their lives. They also desperately need food, drinking water and medicines. The regular operation of the ICR ship that makes deliveries and evacuates the wounded depends fundamentally on security, and that is another reason why the government of Sri Lanka must uphold its commitment to stop using heavy weapons. The second crisis revolves around the conditions for civilians who manage to escape the fighting. We welcome the fact that over 190,000 civilians have been able to do so and are now registered in the IDP camps, including over 120,000 during the past 4 weeks. But the ability of the relevant agencies depends upon the full cooperation of the Sri Lankan government, and bluntly, that has not been forthcoming. It was because of these concerns and others that my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, together with the French Foreign Minister Kushner, visited Sri Lanka on the 29th of April. They made very clear to the President and Foreign Minister that the protection of civilians must be paramount and that the conflict must end. Since their visit, and the welcome visit by the cross-party group of MPs, made up of my right honourable friend, the member for Kilmarnock and Loudoun, who sends his apologies for not being here today. He's actually speaking about the Sri Lankan crisis elsewhere. The right honourable member for Gordon, my honourable friend, the member for Glasgow Central, and the honourable members for Southdown and for Buckingham, there has been some improvement in issuing visas to the staff of the humanitarian agencies and on their ability to move around the country. But more still needs to be done. We will continue to press for improved access by the humanitarian agencies to the IDPs and for adequate supplies of food, water and medicines to reach those who are in need. We are also calling on the government to ensure that the screening of IDPs is carried out in a fully transparent way that respects human rights and the dignity of those involved. The Sri Lankan government also needs to give free access to the international media. Let me be clear, what is needed is greater access and transparency, not less. And as I have said in this place before, honourable members in this House across parties have been criticised and attacked by the Sri Lankan High Commission for speaking out and expressing their legitimate concerns about the actions of the Sri Lankan government. Such criticism of MPs doing their job legitimately on behalf of their constituents is wrong and unacceptable. As honourable members will know, this government has been in the lead in mobilising international pressure to bring about an improvement on the ground. The Prime Minister was the first world leader to call for a ceasefire